Welcome to another Cybr Lab walkthrough video. In this one, I'm going to show you how to get started using the AWS CLI. Let's go ahead and start this free lab on this page here that you can access for free at this URL so that it loads while I explain what we'll be doing today. And by the way, like I said, this is completely free lab that you can launch if you're watching this. All you need is a free Cybr account. So what is the AWS CLI? Well, let's take a look. CLI stands for Command Line Interface, which is really just a fancy term that says software that lets you type in commands through your terminal, which we'll show by having this terminal open over here. Now, the AWS gives us the ability to make calls to the AWS API for all of their services that support it, which is pretty much all or most of their services. So instead of having to log into the AWS console and then manually clicking around to configure services or to launch your resources, we can do all of that simply just by using our keyboard, this terminal, and the AWS CLI. So for example, if you want to create a brand new user in AWS through the IAM service, which stands for Identity and Access Management Service, then you could do that by entering in a command just like this, which is IAM create user. And then you'd pass in a username. Let's say Cybr is fun. And that would go through the AWS API, make sure you have the correct permissions, and then it would create that user and then provide you with a response. The AWS CLI automatically takes care of taking this command, turning it into an API call, and it doesn't show you any of that behind the scenes, which keeps it really nice, clean, and simple. And then, like I said, it will return a nicely formatted response. Now, I'm not going to issue this command right now because I don't actually have my CLI configured, because I'm going to walk you through exactly how to configure it. First things first, if you don't already have the AWS CLI installed, which you can tell by opening up a terminal, which if you're on macOS, you can do by pressing Command plus space on your keyboard, and then typing in terminal, and then press enter, and that will open a new terminal window. Yours will probably look a little bit different than mine because I've added just a tiny bit of customization, but essentially it would look very similar to what we have here. If you're on Windows, then you would click on the Start menu, then search for Command Prompt or PowerShell, whatever you prefer, and then you can open that up. And then if you're on Linux, then you already know how to access the terminal, so you don't need my help for that. Then you would type in AWS -- version, and you should see a response that looks a little bit like this. If it says command not find or not found or AWS not found or whatever, that means you are missing AWS, and I'll show you how to install it. If you see something like this that starts with AWS -CLI and then /, and if you see a version 1 or number 1, that means you have an outdated version. It's not a big deal. You could still use it, and I'm pretty sure you could do most, if not all, of the commands that I'll show you in this video here, but you'll probably want to upgrade sooner rather than later. So if you need to upgrade or if you need to install, then check out this URL right here, or search for this on Google, and it should be one of the first links, if not the first link. And then you can follow the instructions here, depending on your operating system that you're running. It's very straightforward and fairly easy, but if you have any issues at all, please let me know in the comments below, and I'll be happy to help you out and figure out what's going on. And then again, come back here, type in this command, and you should see a result that looks similar to mine, though these numbers here may be a little bit different. Okay, so once you have the AWS CLI installed and you've started the lab, you should get back an access key ID as well as a secret access key. And this is what we'll use to configure our AWS CLI. These are basically our API keys that tell AWS, hey, this is who I am, this is what I have access to, please let me access your API. And the way that we configure it is by typing in AWS configure. Now, one nifty trick with the AWS CLI is that you can configure multiple different profiles if you have multiple different roles or users or whatever else in AWS, instead of overwriting every single time that you configure this CLI. And the way that you can keep those profiles separate is by tagging on this argument of profile. And then you could type in a profile name like Cybr is fun or whatever you want. This can take pretty much any input that you would like. For this profile, I'm going to leave this off because we'll actually set a profile a little bit later on. So let's go ahead and leave that off unless you already have credentials in the AWS CLI, in which case don't overwrite them. Go ahead and use that profile that I just showed. Then we'll press enter. And the first thing that we'll ask for is the AWS access key ID, which is this top value right here. So you can click on that input field and then you can basically paste it into your terminal. And the same thing with the secret access key, which we'll paste with Command V. For the default region name, for Cybr Labs, you want to always use US East 1 because that's how they're configured. But for your own AWS accounts, you would want to use the region that's closest to you or closest to your customers. And then for the default output format, you can leave it to the default of none. I prefer JSON, so I tend to do JSON. It really doesn't matter. Either way, you'll be fine. So you can either leave the default by pressing enter, or you can type in JSON or even text. Totally up to you, completely optional step. So by doing this, when we first configure the AWS CLI, it stores your information in a config file as well as a credentials file. So let's take a look at what that looks like. Using your favorite editor or text editor, I'm going to use Vim. If you're intimidated by Vim or you're not comfortable with it, you absolutely don't have to use Vim. You can use Notepad, text editor, whatever is pre-installed in your operating system that can open files, text files, because that's all that really is. And then in Mac, you will go to AWS config like this. This is the directory path. Windows is a little bit different. If you need help finding it, then let me know. But it will be a sort of a similar format or directory path, just a little bit different. So let's go ahead and press enter. And here you'll see our default config profile that we just configured with the AWS configure command. You'll see the region that we set as well as the output that we set. Let's back out of this, which if you're on Vim and you're not familiar with it, you can do colon and then Q and then press enter. Or if you accidentally made changes, it won't let you quit unless you either save or erase changes, in which case you can use exclamation point at the end, but I don't need to do that. I'm just letting you know in case you accidentally typed on your keyboard or pressed a key that made some sort of modification and you can't find your way out. So now we can do the same thing, but instead of the config file, we can do the credentials file. So this is what it's going to look like. And in this case, you can see my access key ID and secret access key that I submitted. So this is telling the AWS CLI to look at both config and credentials. And in our case, pull the default configurations for both. And that's how it maps the region as well as the output format with the correct credentials that we've configured. So with that out of the way, you're now ready to issue CLI commands. I'll talk a little bit more about how these commands exist at the end and how you can find more information about them. But for now, go ahead and type in this command of AWS STS get caller identity. That looks just like this. And then press enter. And after you press enter, maybe after a second or two, you'll get back a response that contains a user ID, an account ID. This is the AWS unique identifier account for that account, And then this is the ARN, which is an Amazon resource name, which indicates what we are authenticating as, which in this case is a user. So we have ARN, AWS, the IAM service, then we have the account ID that we see up here as well, :user, and then this is the username. Now for these labs, I add some random names and characters in front of it just to make them unique, but in real world, it would probably be a cleaner name. Probably just say Dana, for example, or Dana last name, and so on. It kind of depends on the organization and nomenclature, but this is the username right here. So we are authenticating at or authenticating against the AWS API as an IAM user. And we've just confirmed by issuing this who am I command. So congratulations, you've just issued your first CLI command successfully. Now, something else that you often use or will often use in AWS is called an IAM role, which are very different from IAM users. And while I'm not going to explain in depth what they are in this short video, we do have a separate and dedicated course called the Practical Guide to IAM Roles that you can check out if you're interested. But for this lesson, I'm just demonstrating how to use the CLI for both users as well as to assume roles, which is something you will do very frequently when you're using AWS. So let's go ahead and issue this command of AWS IAM and then list roles. And then we'll do query in order to filter because environments often have a lot of roles in them. And then we'll pass in the role name like this. And this is case sensitive. So be very careful how you're typing in these names because otherwise it's probably going to come up empty. So make sure that it looks like this. And then let's go ahead and press enter. And actually, I accidentally put in a typo that was not meant to be a demonstration of what I was literally just talking about. But that's how important it is to make sure that you get this right, because if you have even just one character off, it's not going to find the role that we're looking for. So kind of glad that mistake happened in this case. So Like I said, if you're not familiar with roles, don't worry about it too much. I just wanted to show you how we can assume this role as our current user through this lab environment. So we get back a bunch of information, including something called an assume role policy document that says that our user Dana, which we can see here, is allowed to assume the role that is this AWS CLI role right here. So that confirms what I was talking about, which is that we are allowed as this Dana person or user to assume this AWS CLI role. So let me show you how to do that through the AWS CLI. Let's go back into our AWS config file. So we'll pull up AWS and then /config, and then scroll down with your arrow keys. And then we're going to add another line using the character O if you're using Vim. If not, feel free to use whatever text editor you want. And then in this case, we're going to type in profile AWS CLI role. So this is going to create and name a brand new profile that's different from the default profile. And then we're going to add a new line with enter. And I'll type in role ARN equals, and then I forgot to copy the ARN, so we're going to have to come back in a second. And then the source profile equals of default. So this profile is going to be linked to this default profile by adding in this line right here. I forgot to grab the ARN, so I'm going to press escape and then :X to save and write the changes. And then we're going to grab this role ARN by coming up here and copying this value right here. Let's go back in the file, scroll down. I'm going to press $sign to get to the end of file. And then I'm going to type the character A in order to add a blank space and then enter the insert mode so I can paste in this value right here, press escape, :X in order to write and save. Okay, so we've now added our profile of AWS CLI role. Keep in mind, your role ARN will very likely look different than mine. It might look the same if you're getting the same lab environment for that particular rotation, or it might have a different number. So make sure that you're grabbing yours and not mine, or this will not work successfully. So now we can issue commands through this role, and the AWS CLI will automatically handle authentication to assume the role for that call by using our profile name. So we can reissue that exact same command that we used at the very beginning of this video, which is get caller identity. But this time we'll pass in a profile name of AWS CLI role, which is the one that we just configured. If you press enter for that, give it a few seconds to get you the results. And you will see now that instead of returning an ARN of a user, we are returning an ARN that is :assumed role, our role name, and then a session name for that assumption session. So in this case, we are no longer issuing commands through our user, but we are using our user to assume this IAM role, and then we're using that IAM role's temporary credentials in order to make calls against the AWS API. So whatever permissions this role has access to, we now also have access to. And to demonstrate that capability, which is something that, again, you will use a lot as you're using AWS, we're going to issue two separate commands, and one's going to succeed and one is going to fail. So using our profile of AWS CLI role, I'm going to call the S3 API in this case, and we're going to list the buckets in this account. So make sure you use that profile of AWS CLI role and then issue this command, and you'll get back a result that includes the name of a bucket. So we have access to list the buckets in this account. However, if I issue this exact same command, but I remove the profile, which means I'm using Dana's IAM credentials, and press enter, we'll get an access denied error for listing the buckets operation. So we know that there are buckets in this account. We know that if we have the right permissions, we can list them because I literally just did that. But in this case, our IAM user did not have access, but our IAM user assuming the role gave us the correct permissions. And we've done all of this through the AWS CLI. We've now seen how to issue commands as a user and also how to be able to assume a role just by configuring our local command line interface. That's how powerful the CLI can be, because now we could even write all kinds of scripts. It could be shell scripts, it could be Python scripts, whatever you want. We can now write scripts using the CLI, for example, and we can issue commands against the AWS API using the credentials that we have access to. If this seems like a lot and it seems overwhelming, let me say this as we start to wrap up this video. I recommend that you go to this URL right here, and this is going to be everything you need in order to successfully issue commands using the CLI, because this is the AWS CLI documentation. If you scroll down a little bit further, you'll see the available services. With these available services, you can see how to issue commands against that service. As an example, we used the STS service a lot. So if I scroll down and look for STS in this list of available services, and I open that up in a separate tab, we can see the available commands, including the get caller identity command that we used multiple times in this video. This will give you a description of what this call does, and then it will give you a synopsis. And this synopsis is hugely important because it tells you exactly how to issue your commands. You can see get caller identity. So in this case, AWS STS, which is what we were doing, AWS STS, then the actual command, which is get caller identity, then the options that we can issue. Now, in this case, when you see brackets like these, that means it's optional. So for this call, everything else is optional. We can just issue this as we saw, and it will work successfully. But in some cases, some calls may have options that are required. I'm going to try to find a completely random one. I don't know if this has any random one. There we go. So this is a perfect example. Here we have 1, 2, 3 options or arguments that are required. If we try to issue this command through AWS SSO get role credentials and we don't pass in a role name or account ID or access token, then we'll get an error. It's not going to work. But if we want to pass these in as well to change our results, then we can also do that, but those are optional. So keep that in mind. But again, I recommend that you go through and look at the reference guide and try to issue various commands and see what happens. This is a great way of learning how to use the AWS CLI. Otherwise, another great way is to continue on with this course. All the labs you see here right now are completely free, so I'd recommend going through and doing the introduction to AWS IAM enumeration to learn more about users, roles, groups, things like that, and to continue your AWS CLI learning journey, and then go on with this lab here and the next one after. They're all free, so have fun, enjoy, and let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.